and welcome to the Modern Homesteading Podcast. This is your host, Rachel Jameson. I am joined today with Harold. We're doing a new little setup here, and Harold is teaching this old chick new things with some technical stuff. So I decided to start the podcast so I could kind of get used to it when I do some interviews with new people. So anyway, how has it been, Harold?
It's been all right. It's been hot, and we've been getting some nice big storms coming through and tearing everything up, and back and forth with that. Every day we've got these like storms that's rolling through, and then just
and you guys have been getting hard hit down there.
Yeah, I mean, really heavy rains, really big winds, and then an hour later the sun's back out, and the humidity's so high you can't stand it. It's just like been like that every day.
Oh, the humidity has been horrible here this year. Typically, we do not get the humidity we have had, but we've had 90-degree days with 90% humidity, and it's just horrible. I do not know how people in the South live like this, because I think this is probably more their normal.
I know. Yeah, it's been crazy. It's sweaty. You go out there and just work out in the garden for like a half an hour, and you come in, and your shirt's almost see-through. It's so wet. It's just you're just completely drenched. Yeah.
And I've been drinking so much water and so many electrolytes, just trying to stay hydrated, because you just sweat buckets. Mm-hmm. So So you guys have been hit by the storms, and I saw you made a certain blog post about your beautiful corn.
Yeah, I'd posted. I posted the corn, how tall it was. Yeah, it was 9.5 feet tall a couple days after the 4th of July, which is just blew my mind. And then a couple days later, we had a big storm come through and just lay it all on the ground.
Did any of it make it at all, or did it all die?
I think 90% of it made it. I had to tie it up. I went out there and drove some bamboo sticks in the ground and run some string back and forth and did kind of like Florida weave and picked it all back up, kind of held it. It's all leaning all up against the strings and everything.
It's not free anymore.
It looks horrible. It ain't pretty rose or anything now, but it is all up off the ground. I broke a few stalks just trying to tie it up and stuff, so some of that probably will die. But it's going to be all right. I think it just looks horrible now. It's kind of got mangled by the weather.
Oh man, you guys just keep getting hit. Like, we were watching the weather a couple of days ago, and it looked like it was coming through again.
I work nights, and I'm in a parking lot. I'm outside working, and we had a storm come through a couple nights ago, and I just swore it was a tornado. It was coming through. The winds were so high. It was almost scary. There was a porta pot out. Those porta pots were out in the parking lot. Right. One of them, and that thing said bye-bye.
Yuck.
Wow, this is crazy. I mean, it was quite the storm.
Man, we are so fortunate to live where we live. I remind myself of that in the summer when it's miserable like this, and all you people are getting bad storms. I try to remind myself of that in January when we're getting feet of snow and it's super cold out, that we don't get that kind of stuff. But
that humidity has been the high heat, the high humidity, the storms. It's actually been really good for the garden as far as moisture and even seed germination and things like that. It's been great. It's been bad for drying some things, because I got like things hanging under my gazebo. Yeah, they're trying to air dry, like garlic and onions and things like that. It's taken them a little bit longer to cure because of all the moisture in the air. Yeah. But it's been really good for like seed germination, especially.
Those moisture diseases, they're thriving in this, unfortunately. A lot of people are getting powdery mildew. And
I'm hoping I don't get corn smut, because that's what happens.
But I hear it's edible. It looks disgusting.
You eat all you want. I'm going to stick to regular corn.
I've never tried it.
Me neither.
I did get it one year when I grew corn. I haven't grown corn in a couple of years, but... So what's going on your homestead?
Well, I harvested about half of my mustard seeds. I've been talking about that a couple times on the podcast, where I was saving them all up to do mustard, and they were starting to dry, and a few of them were starting to drop, and I was like, uh-oh, I better get those cut up and put in bags. So I put them in paper bags, kind of, because it was like some of them were ready and some of them weren't. So I just cut them and dropped them in paper bags, the stems, and just dropped them in paper bags, and I'm kind of letting them just dry in there the rest of the way. And then I'm just shaking those bags, and I can hear the seeds just dropping out of them into the bottom of the bag. And I got half of those picked. Matter of fact, here.
They're so small too. It takes a long,
you can see I got bags of them sitting here.
I have a bag that looks just like that, full of Brussels sprout, kale, and cabbage.
I got these 3 bags just sitting right here in this room, and then I'll probably fill up 3 or 4 more before I get the rest of them. Because it was weird, because I planted 2 different kinds of mustard, and the one I planted went to seed and dried a lot faster than the other one. So I think I probably got another week or two before I picked the other kind. But the
Okay.
seeds look almost the same, but the plants do look the leaves look a little bit different on them. And so I can tell the difference really. But they were both mustard. They were both a kind of mustard, but just two different kinds. But these seeds went, dried out a lot faster.
So you have those in a tall grocery paper bag. Are you worried about them getting moldy at all? I was worried about that.
I didn't pack them very tight. There's a lot of airflow in there, and I'm leaving them open where I got them. I mean, I'm in the house, so there's not humidity.
I think I might try to separate mine because I'm a little worried because I had the same thing. I have some of them that are so dry they were splitting open.
Yes.
And then I have other ones that aren't quite dry yet. And I really don't want to do it by hand. If I did that by hand, it would take hours. I kind of would like them to just split on their own. And
it's why I didn't pack them in too tight. And I used a few bags and I just kind of loosely kind of put them in there. And then I'm going to kind of like wait a couple of days and I'm probably going to turn them around in there just so they don't get, because you're right. I was a little bit worried about that too. I'm just kind of starting to get a little soft.
I think I'm going to separate mine a little bit more.
But they've been in here a couple of days and they're already looking pretty dry. They look like they dried out a lot, even just being in here for a couple of days. So.
Okay. So I see you have some other stuff on here that you've been doing.
Yeah, I've been trying to start a lot of, I think I mentioned it last time. I got some trees. I did some black locust seeds and like 90% of them popped and they're probably like 4 inches tall already.
Oh, wow. Did you use the boiling water method with those?
No, I didn't. I scuffed them a little bit, just a little bit. Okay. I didn't even do much with that. I just kind of barely scuffed them, dropped them in there's like 90% germination.
Wow. Awesome.
The sea berries, I had some sea berries and I only probably got about 50% germination on those, but I did get some popped. None of the pawpaws have pops.
Oh no. Bummer.
I don't know if they were cold stratified enough or not.
Okay.
So I might just leave them in the pot for the winter and see if they pop next year. I don't know. Maybe.
My honey locust that I got took forever. I thought I only got one out of dozens of them. They just took a really, really, really long time because suddenly I have like 30.
The black locusts were very fast. They were the first things up. I was really surprised. So then I actually had them in like a tray. So I just put them in the tray and transplanted them in some pots by themselves because I think these things are going to grow fast and they've already grown a couple inches just being in the pots for a few days. So they're going to grow really fast, I think. So I got a bunch of those.
Nice. Some nitrogen fixers.
Yes, that's kind of why I did it. And then I didn't have gomi, but I want some gomi, right? So I ordered some gomi seeds. But they sent me goji berry seeds. And then when I confronted them, I'm like, these are goji berry. And they're like, that's the same thing. And I'm like, no, they're not. So then I actually had a guy email me about nitrogen fixers and he kept saying goji. And I'm like, we didn't talk about goji in that nitrogen fixer episode that we did.
Yeah.
I didn't talk about goji. Well, yeah, you did. Gumi, goji, same thing. I'm like, no, they're not. They're two different things. So there's this huge confusion about goji. And from what I'm reading, so in certain parts of the country and in the world, they do call gomis goji berries. So this is why people use Latin. This is exactly why people use Latin.
It is. This is why word choice matters with some things. That's like, but that's how I was when we talked about this with apple scrap vinegar versus apple cider vinegar.
Yeah.
People will use things interchangeably. So you might have to do a blog post or something.
So I'm actually having a hard time finding some gomi seeds. I don't think I can find any. I mean, I've been looking everywhere for gomi seeds. But, I can find the plants. They're just really expensive.
Sure.
So I was trying to go with seeds because I didn't want to dish out a bunch of money for, a couple gomi bushes or whatever, but I may have to.
Maybe you could be the person that sells them.
I could be, I guess. I don't know. And I don't even know how easy they are to propagate from seed. That's why maybe people aren't selling the seeds. I don't know. But I'm just having a hard time because I really want some gomi, but I didn't really want to spend the big bucks, actually buying a plant or a tree. I wanted to just buy the seeds and take my time and get it there. But it's just not really working out like I wanted it to. Anyway, that's been mind-boggling to me, the amount of confusion on that. And there is a lot of confusion on that. And I'm already picking some pears and we're picking some small plums. There's been a few plums that are ripe. They're small though. But lots of pears. I'd say most of the pears are ripe and pickable and eatable right now, which stinks because I ain't quite got my dehydrator done yet.
Oh, your big solar one that you're making?
Yeah, it's because I had some other things pop up and I ain't had time to work on it.
Would it work though right now with all this humidity?
Probably not right now, but I'm hoping it dries out a bit. So the pears kind of ripened a little too early this year than what they normally do.
I feel like everything's early this year.
Yeah, it did. It just things happen too early. So Again, I may not be able to dehydrate too many pears this year, but apples should be good and some other stuff. Should have time for that. And tomatoes are on the brink. I'm telling you, it's going to be a tomato palooza. We got so many tomatoes out there.
How many did you plant?
I didn't plant a bunch, but these plants are loaded. I mean, I think I only planted. I mean, I got all the different ones. I mean, I got cherry tomatoes. I got big boys. I've got beefsteak. I've got Romas. That's got a bunch. I didn't plant a bunch of each, but I've got a few of each, right? And they're all so loaded with green tomatoes. Big. I mean, my beefsteaks are so big, but they're all green. I haven't even had a red cherry tomato yet, but they're days away. I mean, 3, 4, 5 days. I'm gonna have so many I don't know what to do with them. So it's about to blow up with the tomatoes, and I'm getting excited because I love it when we start getting lots of red tomatoes. So
yummy.
It's about to get busy though with the cannon.
Mine are a couple weeks away, but I only planted 4 tomato plants this year.
Yeah, I planted 4 beefsteak, I think 2 big boys, 4 or 5 Romas. I planted some different kinds of cherries. Like I got the yellow cherry, like the pear. What do they call them? I don't remember now what they're called, but they're a yellow cherry tomato.
Okay.
And I got a couple different kinds of red ones. And then like Sonia had sent me some of these really tiny ones. I can't remember what they're called.
Oh yeah.
And I've got a couple of them going. I can't remember what they're called, but they're really, really tiny. They're like a berry. Yeah, they're like the size of a berry. They're really small, and they're more of a novelty.
Put out tons and tons of them.
Yeah, and the plants themselves are really big, and they got a few flowers, but I don't have a lot on them yet. So I don't know if they're just taking a lot longer to. I kind of separated them away from the others, though. But I mean, the plant's huge, so we'll see what happens with that. I'm hoping I get a bunch because I was anxious to try them, and then I got a couple others going. But so I have a bunch of tomato plants, but I don't have a lot of any one kind because I was just spreading them out a little bit. But yeah,
are those the red currant tomatoes? I
don't think that's what they were called. I would have to. I can't remember what she called them, but they're really tiny. Like she says, she just takes like a. She'll break off like a whole little branch and kind of put on the plate, like a little side garnish or whatever. Yeah. It looks like a fun. It's like I said, it's kind of a novelty plant in some ways. It's not a lot of food it's producing, but I like growing stuff. It's just fun to grow sometimes too.
Sometimes it is fun to do that.
Yeah. See what else you got. I mean, there's nothing cooler than a tiny tomato that's smaller than a grape. I think that's kind of cool. I mean,
that's like when I grew the cucumber, the little cucamelons one year. Mm-hmm. Oh man, does that plant produce so many? I didn't know what to do with them all. Yeah. And they're just tiny, tiny little cucumbers.
I think it's fun to grow stuff like that. Just blows up and provides you something kind of novelty. Like even if it ain't the best tasting or it's the most productive, it's just fun to have something different. That's just kind of, I don't know, just something you can say, wow, that's cool. I grew that,
When gardeners and homesteaders
one year, and I've never grew them since, but it's like loofahs were kind of cool to grow one year. I don't really. It's not a thing that I would grow every year because I don't like I'm using loofahs, but it was fun to grow one time just to see what it was like,
I think when gardeners and homesteaders get bored, sometimes they just grow fun things.
I just like to see what you can do. That's fun to me.
Yes. It's like Sepp Holzer growing a lemon tree in the Alps.
Yeah, exactly. It's not something you're going to like make real productive, but it's just to say you did it is pretty cool. All right.
Yeah. So what about me?
You've got 2 homesteads going, so let's hear about them.
Other than being exhausted and I need a nap, the rural homestead is coming along. I think people saw, if you're a member in the Homestead Front Porch Facebook group, we got the basement dug. So the basement is dug and there's gravel in. I thought the forms were going to go up this week. They haven't yet, so we'll see for pouring the basement, because we're just getting it poured. We're not doing blocks or anything. And then the wild raspberries and blueberries are ripe out there. So that's kind of fun to go around and pick those and eat them and make sure we're making enough noise so the bears don't find us while they're doing the same thing. So that's what's going on there.
We're getting real exciting up there at that.
Yeah.
I was amazed at how much sand you had in your, I've seen where they dug it and all that sand that was in there. You're definitely going to be doing a lot of compost production.
Okay, so that's the underneath. There actually is, because it was once forest, there actually is, I don't know, 4 to 6 inches of nice dark dirt
Mhm.
on top that they pushed back. But when they
Okay.
dug the hole, man, it's all sand, which is what you
Yeah.
want when you have a basement. You don't want water
Good
to collect
drainage.
around that. Yeah. But
Yeah.
it's pretty, I mean, when people say they have challenges with soil, I'm like, yes, I know. I live on a sand dune because that's what Michigan is, at least where we're at. It's a sand dune.
It definitely looks like that could be a little bit of a challenge in the future, depending on what
Yes,
you're trying to do.
we get very good drainage, but it's too good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you're getting a few inches of topsoil on top of that, you should be
Yeah.
really good for gardening.
So
and whatnot.
we're definitely talking about ways to build organic matter and the soil, which is why this last weekend we went to a conference at Baker's and we learned about biochar, because we're just going to need to do whatever it is we can to get that soil a little bit better. And we also tend toward acidic, obviously, since we're growing wild raspberries and blueberries, we obviously tend toward acidic, because it was once forest. So yeah, so that's what I did. That's what we're doing there. And at the suburban homestead, my potatoes have started to flower, which means I'm going to need to water them more. I think we did an episode about that a while back, but when the potatoes come into flower, they need more water to put into the tubers. So usually the rest of my garden doesn't need as much water. So I will, if I need to water, which I haven't had to except for like twice all year, which blows my mind. We've had so much rain. But if I need extra water, usually I will hand water the potatoes during this time. But so then last week, my honey locust and my sea berries that I had planted from berries months ago got to the point where they could no longer be in their pots. And so I had to put them in the garden, kind of in their holding place until we move them. And I was floored that my sea berries have all lived. I've only lost one of the 26 plants.
Have you ever had sea berry before?
Do
you have them around?
I have not.
You do want to be careful where you plant those, because, and I don't think we talked about this on the nitrogen episode, but those things have some serious thorns on them.
Yeah, I have heard they do. I kind of figured that I would be giving some of these away, but I never anticipated that all of the seeds would germinate. I got 99% germination. And then during transplantation, I thought I would lose some, and I've only lost one. So I started with 28 seeds, and I'm down to 26 plants, which I'm kind of floored. I didn't expect them to live. Yeah, I really only wanted like 5.
I planted, I maybe a dozen, and I think I only got like 6. So I think I got like about 50%. Yeah. So
they're doing great. I have lost 2 of my air layers that I've done. So I did air layering on my Rose of Sharon and my female mulberry and 2 male mulberries. And what else did I do it on? I did it on 2 different apple trees, and I've lost 2 of them. I think I've done about 18 of them, somewhere around there. And I've lost 2 of them where the branch at the end of the air layer just died. So I did something wrong there, or they just died and didn't like it. But the rest of them have been on there, gosh, anywhere from 2 to 4 or 5 weeks.
Now, how long will you leave? So you obviously wrap
around it's like it. 6 to 8 weeks is when.
Did you purchase like those ball things that go around it, or did you make something?
I didn't. So, so I should talk about that. So at first I saw this cup method where you take a cup and you cut a hole in the bottom of it and you slit up the side and you stuff it full of cocoa coir. Mm-hmm. And then you wrap it around the tree and you tape it, or you use like cellophane. I'll tell you, that was a royal pain in the butt. You needed like 5 hands and it was a pain. So then I saw, just by chance scrolling, I don't know if it was Facebook or Instagram, but somebody used just a Ziploc baggie and they stuffed it full of the moist cocoa coir and then just sliced it and wrapped it around the branch. That was so much easier. So that's what I did for the rest of them. It was so much easier because the baggie, you can just mold it to whatever you can. I was having problems with the plastic cup breaking when I was trying to wrap it tight, and it was sliding. So I was having a hard time keeping it in the spot I wanted it, where with the baggie, it just stayed. It was way easier. So
nice. Now, how long will you leave that on there before you cut it and plant it?
from what I've read, I'm not an expert, so find an expert, but it was like 6 to 8 weeks. But what you do is you can unwrap that or cut it back to kind of peek and see if there's roots in there. And if there's not, you leave it a little bit longer.
Okay.
So
that'd probably time out right. So about fall, when it starts cooling down a little bit.
Yeah.
Cut them and get them in the ground. And
so I asked my friend Andrew, who's a horticulturist, and I need to have him on here actually, but he's been so busy. He's a tree guy. He went to MSU and he knows all this stuff. He said that around spring was the best time. The best time to do it is when the hormones in the tree branches are at their peak, which is usually like May-ish, which is when I tried to do a lot of it. Some of it I did later than that. But yeah, you want to get that 1 to 2 year old tip of the branch where the hormones in the branch are at their peak. But I also did use rooting hormone.
Okay.
So yeah, that's been, I think, going good. We'll see. I'm hoping it's going well. I'd really like to take our old apple tree that we have no idea what it is. I really want to take a piece of it with us. Some of it's just sentimental reasons. And then others is it's super prolific tree. It's always produced tons and tons of apples, not the greatest eating apples, but we've always used it for applesauce, cider, and apple cider vinegar. And it just produces so many apples. And I have no idea what it is, but we just want to take it with us. So I did, I think 6 on there. One of them failed. So we're down to 5. And that tree is actually coming out this year once the apples are harvested because it's in pretty rough shape. It's probably
thought about taking some of the seeds from the apple and try to grow.
I probably will do that too this year.
Yeah, just for back and see if that goes too. Yeah.
I actually think that might be how it was planted.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cause it's not a pretty tree. It's the apples are really mealy, but last year we got, I think it was 5 or 6 wheelbarrows off of it.
Nice.
Just a huge apples off of that thing. But they're not great for just eating. They're not sweet. They're really mealy.
Those are great for other things though, for sure.
Yeah, they do work. And then that's what I thought. I'm like, these are great for pig feed, whatever. But anyway, so that's what I did there. And then my elderberries are getting really close to having some little berries. I did harvest some of the flowers to make some elderberry flower stuff, which I've never done before because I've never had elderberries before. And then, like we said before, I have loads of cabbage, kale, and Brussels sprout seeds for winter sprouts that I'm trying to harvest just like you are, you're doing it for mustard seed to make mustard. I'm doing it we love to eat sprouts in the winter. We make a lot of sprouts.
Mustard seeds are used for sprouts also. So
it's a little spicier.
Yeah. So I might say, it looks like I might have a bunch, probably way more than I need to make some mustard. So I might save a bunch of them just for that too.
Sprouting does use a lot of seed. You use a lot of seed. But when you let those things go to seed, like kale, it's basically 2 years. So you let it, and it looks horrible. My garden looks trashed right now because it does not look pretty. There is so many seed pods on there. Yeah. It's unbelievable.
You've seen what I had in these bags of mustard. There is literally thousands and thousands and thousands of these seed pods, a few seeds in every pod. I could probably have a year's worth of microgreens, if nothing else.
Yeah. So I think it's a great way if you're trying to do a full circle thing. For me, it was just kind of another one of those things where as a homesteader, you just do something fun because it's different. And I thought,
that's kind of what it's for me. I wanted to try it. They went to seed. They bolted quickly and went to seed quickly. And I was like, well, let's make the most of this. Let's use this.
Well, that's what happened with my Brussels sprouts. It was like my 3rd attempt to grow Brussels sprouts. And of course we've had an unusually warm year. And so, no, these were last year's Brussels sprouts. They never really got the nice size Brussels sprouts on them. And then they just went to seed really quick. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, well, I'll just take the seeds then, and never really got Brussels sprouts out of them. I have not figured out how to grow Brussels sprouts yet, sadly.
It's probably more difficult in your area anyway, just because they're such a long season plant.
Might be. They're one of my favorites, though. I love Brussels sprouts. But
you have to build you a greenhouse on new properties. You have to build you a big greenhouse. That's, kind of really climate controlled, so you can just grow year round and you can grow anything you want.
That would be amazing. I would really like one.
We should probably jump into our main topic.
I'm taking donations. Does anybody want my PayPal?
There you go. Well, today's topic was your idea, and because it's something that's heavily on your mind, you're dealing with a lot of this stuff. You've dealt with a lot of this stuff recently, and so I think I'll just let you introduce the topic and kind of start guiding us through it, and because I think it's a good one.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm an expert on it, but I chose this topic because people have asked, and we've talked about it privately, choosing a site for a homestead or permaculture property. We had a list of things that we wanted. We both had our own lists because my husband's an avid hunter. And I had my own list because obviously permaculture, gardening, homesteading. So we had this wish list, and some of this stuff it's just really helpful to come up with that list because everybody's going to have a different idea in mind. Some people are going to be looking for an urban homestead. Some people like us are going to be looking for rural.
Let's begin with that first. Let's talk about that for just a second. We're going to be talking about things for if you're looking for a homestead, it's going to meet all these needs. But let's just be clear. You can homestead most anywhere you're at. I mean, you say at the end of every episode, just grow where you're planted, and would I pick where I'm homesteading at? Absolutely not. Am I able to homestead here and do a lot? Absolutely. So, I mean, don't think when you have to have a list that completes all these things. This is if you're in that stage of life where you're wanting to go to the next level or, and get everything you want. That's great. But don't let that stop you from doing it right where you're at. And I mean, that out there to begin
some of these things on the list, it doesn't matter what size of property you have or where it's at. It's something you're going to want to make sure. I mean, we'll get into it, but like some of the zoning and stuff is definitely going to be important no matter where you're at, because it just becomes part of a problem that you can't fix sometimes. And you've dealt with it. So anyways, so some of the practical steps for homestead selection, you're going to want to do your research. So you're going to want to gather the information about different areas. You can do that online. You can do that through government offices. You can do that through community groups. You can pick maybe an area that you're interested in. And a lot of places, at least here, we have like this overheard in such and such a city, overheard in such and such a city, or you can get on those and start to kind of get a feel for the area. Real estate agents now, I have that on there, but sometimes they really have no idea or understanding of what homesteading and farming is about. So unless you find one that specifically understands that, you might not get what you're hoping for out of them.
But that being said, you can get on their websites of these real estate companies and you can see the listings and you can try to narrow it down.
That's how we found it. Actually, we didn't even have a real estate agent yet. When we found our property, we had been looking and looking and looking, just searching. We had started looking early just to get a feel for, number one, what was out there. And number two, kind of where the prices were. Now, this is 4 years ago. The prices have gone crazy now, but it does kind of start to give you a feel for it. We also took many drives to areas we thought we were interested. Now, for us, it was easy because we knew we weren't going to go. Like, we had this radius in this area that we weren't going to go far from because we didn't want to move from the area. And now, if you're going somewhere miles and miles away, you probably will want to like take a vacation there and go drive around and see things. Buying something sight unseen is I don't know if I could. That would be hard.
I think I was 13 years old, 12 or 13 years old. And my family up and moved to Tennessee. Well, I remember we took a vacation for a week and we went down there and we stayed in a hotel and we just drove around and my dad was just talking to, real estate agents and we're looking at places and, we just took like a week and dad found a place down there and a job down there and everything else. And we up and moved to Tennessee from Indiana. But we just took a vacation and just kind of spent time in the area looking around and found stuff, and
that was my number two, was just like go physically visit where you think you might want to go, explore the landscape, look at the soil, visit the towns, that are nearby and maybe some groups that you might want to participate in. I mean, maybe nobody's going to want to be that involved in the community, but I'll talk about it a little bit later, but if you become if you're going to be homeschooling, you might want to see if there's groups in the area. If you're really involved in 4-H, you might want to check out some of that, all of that stuff. My number 3 was consult experts. It just depends on what you're going to be looking into. If you're buying an urban site or if you're buying an old farm, I do think it's probably pretty important to maybe get the soil tested and make sure you're not getting into some chemical exposures and all of that kind of stuff. You're going to want to consult some experts, some local growers. I mean, you're not going to move to my area and grow lemons. So if one of your goals is to have tropical fruits, you're not going to be moving to Michigan. So you're going to want to make sure you've looked into some of that.
It might be a hot item at a farmer's market, though. Locally grown lemons up in Michigan. I can imagine that being a heck of a sales pitch.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're going to want to talk to you're going to want to acquire some of the legal documents. Certain areas are going to have certain restrictions. Some towns, if you're going to do urban, some towns are really open to having urban chickens and urban goats, and other towns are going to completely hate that and not be interested at all and be totally against it. So you're going to want to, these are the things to be thinking about.
I mean, if you're a really contrary person and you're not afraid of conflict, we know some people like that would move into an area like that on purpose just so they can stir the pot and change the laws, and they would do everything they can. They'd just
and good for them
in their yard. And that's not me. I would probably just rather move to a place where I don't have the conflict, But some people, they wouldn't scare them a bit.
Yeah. And then my 4th thing before we get really into the weeds here with this is just plan and design. Create a plan on how you intend to use the land, and what are your dreams and goals? What do you want to do? Some people, their sole purpose of moving to an urban or a rural land is because they want to have a farm and be part of farmers markets, and they want to be selling, and they want to make this into a business. Some people like myself are just really interested in just having a homestead more for their personal use or maybe some family. Mm-hmm. You might want to look into hiring a drone so you can look at the land a little bit better. That may not matter as much if it's urban. With our land, it was so treed, it was really hard for us to see where things were at. So we did hire a drone to look at it. You can use Google Earth. There's other maps that you can find available for topographical.
I was watching this YouTube channel of these people who bought some land, and they had been living there several months, and they didn't even know they had a pond on their land. It was so overgrown, and they cleaned it off. And this was it was like a 1/4 acre, 1/2 acre pond. It was a pretty good sized pond, deep and everything, but it had so much growth hanging over it. They couldn't even see it from aerial views or anything. It was completely grown over, and they didn't even know they had it.
So it's funny you say that, because my husband, the first year we owned our property, my husband went out and was hunting on it. And on his way back to the car, he was walking back to the car. He says, I look over and I see a foundation for a silo and a barn on our property that we never saw, never had any record of. Mm-hmm. Because it was so, in the summer, the trees and the raspberries have so overtaken, you couldn't even see it. And now it's really obvious. It's an old, very old, from the 1800s barn and silo foundation that are right there. And I have some dreams around that, but it was just wild because we never knew it was there.
It's amazing what nature can hide.
There's a big, huge tree growing right up through where the barn was. So, So let's get into the weeds of what exactly to look for yourself. Doesn't matter where you're at for this one, but your climate and your weather. So for us, we weren't moving far away, but a lot of people are moving across the country or to totally different areas. So you're going to want to look at what temperature you're going to want to be living in, what the average highs and lows are, your grow zones, know what you can and can't plant. Like I said, we're not going to probably be growing lemons here without a lot of effort. What are your frost-free dates, and understand those limitations? We have a pretty short growing season here. And so a lot of people that actually want to homestead and stuff don't want to come here because of that.
And honestly, there's places you can go that is not ideal for homesteading, and the land will be extremely cheap. And maybe that might be a sacrifice you're willing to make and make it tougher and overcome some things because you can get the land really, really super cheap. But then, places where things obviously grow better and the soil's better and the land might be more, there might be a balance there where you just have to figure out what you're willing to kind of overcome for the price.
And I think that's what you see a lot. So the more rural you get, at least here in Michigan, the more affordable property gets. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people that have chosen to homestead in the UP, which is a very harsh climate to homestead in. It is cold. They get tons and tons of snow. And now they've reintroduced wolves to the UP. So there's a very heavy predation up there with like cattle and sheep, but people do it because it's affordable. Just know what you're getting into.
Yeah, you could, there's some desert areas in this country. You could buy land real cheap, but it's going to be really difficult to do.
And then we talk about that. Like, well, the next thing it's like microclimates. So you can create microclimates, but rainfall, when you're in a desert area, that is something to consider. Where is your water going to come from? Where is your rain going to come from? And you're going to want to consider your wind and your sun patterns, the storm likelihood. So earthquakes, hurricanes, flooding, tornadoes. You're going to want to look into that because it affects your insurance, but it also affects your ability to grow. So if you're living somewhere where it often floods or you're constantly having problems with your soil just washing away, might not be the greatest place to
or you're almost guaranteed to get hit by a hurricane once a year or something.
Right. It might not be the greatest place to grow corn, but if you want a ton of ducks, maybe. I don't know, So those are something to consider. The next thing I had on the list, number 2, was soil fertility and contaminants. To me, this was really big. We didn't get to pick our climate because we still wanted to remain where we're at by family, but we really were interested in soil quality, fertility, and contaminants. I don't have much luck with the fact that we do have Michigan sand here, but one of the reasons we didn't buy an existing farm, which would have been way easier, was because I didn't want to deal with what they had done in the past on the soil with the land. And I also didn't want to be, most of the time here and maybe other places, when you have a farm that was existing, there's farms nearby. And I didn't want to deal with overspray from other farms. Which happens a lot. I see a lot of posts in homestead groups where people's crops on the edges of their farms are destroyed because the farm next door was spraying for something and it killed theirs or contaminated theirs. So that's something to consider. Where we're at, I think it's becoming more and more common for places to spray bodies of water for mosquitoes and stuff like that. So we were trying to avoid that. And then for us, we actually have electric lines that run the long length of our 20 acres. And we have put ourselves on a no spray for our electric company because they will come along those lines and spray so trees don't grow. And so those are just things to consider.
I think, especially when it comes to contaminants, especially if you're in an urban area, there's always a lot of lead potential and other contaminants.
Yep.
But something don't get thought about enough because people think, well, we'll just avoid the towns. Well, a lot of times though, on these rural homesteads, you got to consider history. Okay. And one thing about being in a rural area is you're responsible for getting rid of your own trash. What happened for a lot of these larger homesteads was they would just designate an area of their homestead to turn into a dump. And and sometimes that's hidden when you first buy a place. You'll have a lot of overgrowth on that or whatever, and you'll get to digging and you'll find all this stuff that got just buried.
And I don't know how you would. The only way you would know that's pretty hard to find out other than, maybe walking it or talking to people about what the property used to have or whatever, that would be hard. So the other thing,
soil tests could definitely pick up on.
That's what I was going to say is soil tests specifically for things like heavy metals like lead or MTBE, which was an additive that they put in gasoline. So a lot of farms have that from having like their own gas tanks or tractors in the old days. So it might be something you want to consider doing is doing some testing, especially if you suspect that there was an old homestead there or there is currently one. And And then, of course, the soil fertility, I would have liked to have more fertile soil, but we opted for starting completely with raw land. Now, we did at one point have a barn on our land, but it was, from what we understand, more used for storage and part of a property that was further away. And our property was, because our property is so hilly and it has many ponds on it, it was never used for crops or anything, which creates problems, but yet it meant that we didn't have any contaminants probably.
Right, from
and
that, yeah.
From the wildlife that we have seen, we don't have any. There's certain ways, like if you have an abundance of snakes or reptiles, that is a pretty good indication, we've been told, that your land isn't contaminated, because they take in contaminants through their skin and they don't live through that. So because we have a lot of little lizards and snakes running around, apparently that's a good indication that the soil and the water isn't contaminated. So number 3, topographical and drainage. So for me, this was like kind of more of a permaculture thing. So observing, one of the permaculture principles. So the last 3 or 4 years that we've had the property, that's kind of what we've done. Whenever there was a rain event, whenever it was dry, we've just observed and taken mental notes. And you can kind of go back. That's one of the cool things about living in the age that we live in. You can go back through like Google Maps and stuff and look at your property and see how it did during such and such a drought, or how it did during all this rain. You can't physically see during the rain, but you can see where maybe water pooled, or maybe where it was dry, which can be really helpful. You want to watch where the water goes, and how we'll use the hills and the valleys and the slopes. You can get some of the information. I cannot remember, and I've been racking my brain since I made these notes, but there is a website that the government has that you can find your topographical stuff. I know Verge Permaculture has access to some of that, where you can go and put some of your I'm sure there's some government websites with where you can put it in and you can see the topographical stuff. Now you can do this with property before you even own it, just to look at an area and get an idea.
I think there's even a setting on like Google Earth or Google Maps or something that even shows some of that, I think.
Yeah, and Curtis Stone has been doing a bunch of stuff on helping. He's been going state by state in the United States, and then Providence in Canada, going through all of them, helping people find good places to homestead.
I'm going to say this. I don't even know. I can't recommend it officially or anything, but he actually has a course right now that he's promoting on buying homestead land. I don't know if you've seen that. It's popped up on my feed.
I haven't seen the actual course, but I've seen a couple of his videos, because I watched the one that he did with Michigan, which was pretty interesting. So he actually goes through that. So you might want to use that as a resource if you're looking at a specific state, and he talks about that. And he uses a lot of those tools while he's doing his YouTube video. He uses a lot of those tools and talks about that. So it's pretty cool. And it is something to consider. I mean, so for example, our property is pretty hilly. So if we wanted to do hay or corn, it would be pretty impossible on our property, which is why our property is more of a permaculture property than a farm property, because we just have too many hills. You're never going to be able to go in there and hay or do grain. It's just only small scale, people scale, not big tractor scale. It's just never going to work. So
I would say, you were talking about drainage, and I have a friend a few years ago, and he bought a 5-acre property, and I helped him move when it was in the middle of winter when we moved everything over there. He didn't really know nothing about the property, but he was living in town. He was looking to get some land. He got a 5-acre piece of property. It looked like a decent piece of land. Well, he jumps right into homesteading, starts putting in gardens, planting trees, getting animals, doing all the things. And he put his gardens in, and what he didn't know, because again, with this kind of observe principle, and he didn't get any time, and the spring rains came, and there was an area right through the middle of his property that basically just turned into a river. I mean, a river. Like,
we have an area that does that.
Flowing. I mean, it was amazing. And and so think maybe it's an anomaly. He moves everything the next year, whatnot. Nope. The next year, again, the
Oh
same
boy.
thing. So, I mean, he couldn't even like drive to the back of his property anymore because he couldn't even get a lawnmower back here because it would just be so muddy, he couldn't even do anything. And again, he was able to kind of overcome that by doing some things, but it was a big section of his property he really couldn't use for anything. And
Yeah.
because of the way it was, the properties around him, he really couldn't do much as far as fixing it. I mean, he could have tiled up the entire and went all the way around his property with tile and kind of moved it around the property, but it would have been really expensive for him. He wasn't really in a position to do that. So I'm just saying that, yeah, observing is really important.
And you don't have to buy a piece of property to see that. If you go onto a piece of property and you start just to observe, you can see signs of it. So on our property, we actually have a part of it that does that because from top to back with our property, we actually drop considerably.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like a mountain or anything, but it's enough. And we actually have this, the front of our property feeds a pond that is at the back of the 20 acres. And you can see right the path that it always takes. And you could see that just from walking it, even if you don't own it. Because
like I said, with him, it was a little difficult. It was middle of winter, snow on the ground.
Yeah,
you couldn't really
that would
see
be hard.
anything. And, yeah, he just
but
took the chance.
You can see this on ours. You can see this on Google Earth.
Yeah.
You can see that there's a little bit of a rut and then, oh yeah, there's a pond back there. I bet you the water. So just try to think when you're looking for property, just try to mentally take note of those things and observe and take your time. And I know it's hard because sometimes property sells super fast, especially if it's at a good price. And you just got to take some risks sometimes. But if you can.
Too, there are people who specialize in that too. So if maybe you're going to make a big investment, it might be worth hiring somebody to come in and take a look and understand and kind of survey everything and tell you, hey, you're going to have a water issue here. You're going to have drainage issues over there. You're going to have this and that. And there's people that do this for a living that could definitely, tell you what you're going to have. And it could be worth the investment, especially if you're going to be spending, hundreds of thousands of dollars on a property. It could definitely be worth that investment to have somebody come in and tell you.
Yeah. And you can put, I can talk about that in a minute. We'll talk about contingencies in a minute, but you can also talk to neighbors or even the property owner might be, they don't always tell you everything, but you could ask questions. So water resources is number 4. Are there any natural water features like ponds, rivers, streams? Now these can be good things for permaculture, but they can also be bad things. If you live down the Mississippi River, you could have problems with flooding. So it can be good and bad. Just note them. Can you put in a well affordably? So we were talking about here, it's still expensive to put in a well. It's like, I think the first 100 feet is about, I want to say it's like $10,000, something. It's ridiculous. It's like $100 a foot here. Out west though, some of those places, there's no water for hundreds of feet. You're not getting a well in. So that's something you're going to want to consider is water. Do you have access to water? Can you irrigate? Can you drive wells? How much is it going to cost to put in?
You can see where your water, there are websites and stuff that'll show you where your water table is and how deep they are.
And you can also call local well drilling companies and they can tell you too. They usually have a pretty good idea. They've usually done enough of them to say, usually wells out in the area are 120 feet or 80 feet or 300 feet, whatever it is. So that's something important because I know there are a lot of places. And I also know that there's states that don't have water rights. Now in Michigan, you have rights to the water under your land. I think out west, that's kind of uncommon from what I hear. Like, I think, is it Iowa or Idaho that's having problems with that right now? I think it's Iowa.
I'm not really sure. I mean, for a long time, like Colorado was on the list, but I think they made some changes. There's some different ones.
So something to consider.
Look into your state and kind of figure out what that is. And that might be another thing to determine if it's a state where you want to live in to try to homestead. I mean, it might be a factor.
Right. I mean, and some of those states, it's just because water is so hard to get to because you're on a mountain. Here, because Michigan water just falls from the sky, it's not too difficult for wells and you own the water under you. So, so water management, like collection, is that something you're interested in? Is it possible for you to use your gray water? Can you collect rainwater? Can you use swales, and use the pond water? Some places that's not possible. They won't let you do that. Other places they do. So that might be something you want to consider. This next one is a really huge one. It happens a lot probably everywhere. But number 5, I have accessibility and infrastructure. One of the biggest things that we ran across looking for property was we found a few pieces of property. We're like, wow, that's really affordable. Well, come to find out it was landlocked.
Yeah. Unless there's been some easements.
Yeah. There's a couple of them had no easements. Some of them had really long easements. Like you can buy 20 acres for really, really cheap, but you have literally to go through 100 acres just to get back to your 20 acres. So,
oh, man.
Yeah, so that's something to consider. I know a lot of property like out west or even in the UP, this happens a lot where the government will sell off old forested land, but it's literally you need a helicopter to get to it. So definitely look into that. Can you get to it easily?
Sometimes, though, I like the idea of being that far buried.
I know, yeah. So for us, one of the things we actually didn't want a paved road. Now, some people are going to want a paved road. If you're going to be farming and taking stuff in and out, like cattle in and out, or I don't know, or like doing a lot of market growing, and you want to have a lot of people access your land because you're going to have like a roadside stand, you might want a paved road where you get a lot of traffic. That might be really important to you. For us, it wasn't. We wanted a gravel road because we wanted that slower pace of life. So that's something to consider. And do you have year-round access? Even if you don't have snow, you might have a rainy season where your road is not very accessible because it just turns into a big, huge mud pit. That's something to look into. Utilities.
Some states are definitely worse about that than others. I've been to, I've traveled all over the United States, and there's definitely some places where they just shut roads down because they don't maintain them during certain parts of the year, and they just shut them down. They won't even let you go down them, or go down them at your own risk because they don't do anything.
There's a section of our road that is not plowed or maintained at all. Mm-hmm. So if we get enough snow in one winter, you got to go the long way around.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but we were okay with that, and we went in fully knowing that. So just be aware of that. One of the other things to consider is if you do have an easement, is the neighbor okay with that? Are they difficult about that? Because if you're crossing their property, even though it's a legal easement, you don't want to constantly be bickering with your neighbor. It's just not.
Yeah, sometimes they'll do like a 20-year easement, or
right?
Yep. Where are we at in that? And are they planning on upping? Can you redo that?
Exactly.
Because it runs out. What's your options then?
Right? Yeah.
We don't want to do that again. We're not going to let you have that. And there's nothing you can do. I mean,
right? Exactly. Yeah. So make sure you're getting like the legal information on that. Mm-hmm. The other thing is access to utilities. So some of these places are so remote that you don't have access to utilities. So if you don't, are you willing to spend the money on wind, solar, or are you willing to live really primitively? I mean, there's even places urban. I'm thinking some of these, I don't know if this is the case anymore. So if somebody from Flint or Detroit will probably email us back. But at one point in time, in Detroit right now is getting rebuilt. People are going down there and buying super cheap houses and buying 2 or 3 lots next to it and turning them into urban farms.
Yep.
But some of those places are having a hard time getting access to utilities, even though they're within the city. So just something to look into to make sure that you have that infrastructure that you need. And then how much, if you're doing this in the city, how much you're going to have to pay for watering. You got city water. I know you have to deal with that. How much is that going to cost? Can you collect rainwater, all that stuff? And then another thing, especially if you're going rural, do you have access to the hospital or EMS? Do you want that? Is that something that's important to you? Definitely consider that. How far your kids are from school. If you're going to be using the school system, do you like the school? Shopping, feed stores. How far are you going to have to go to get your feed or your supplies that you need? Or if you want to go to a market, is there one nearby, or are you going to have to drive? Are you okay with driving 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour and a half to go to market for customers? For me, it's really important to be near a library. I'm sure everybody's surprised after the last podcast.
Last episode, yeah.
But Yeah.
we're building more libraries, so we don't have to go anymore. We just build our
right.
own.
Or you can just start creating your own library and inviting all your friends over to read books. But, and I wasn't sure where to put this, but one of the other things that's kind of might be important for some people, maybe some people don't care, but are you going to be able to insure it?
Yeah.
There's places in this country now where it's really hard to get insurance. I'm thinking of like Florida on the coast.
And honestly,
yeah,
a lot of times it's been stuff that's been built on the property too that wasn't built to code and may be insurable also. That's
right. Yeah. And there are well, I'll get into that in this one, I guess. Number 6. So legal zoning regulations. And I said, quote unquote, the bane of my existence.
Yeah. Everybody.
I think anybody's, but there's certain property. It probably depends on where you're at, but here we have multiple zoning. So our property is zoned rural residential. You can get zoned agricultural, which you just brought up, building to code. Now, if you're zoned agricultural in Michigan, at least in the county that I'm in, you actually can build things not to code.
Yeah, that's probably county by county, any state.
Yeah, it might be. And you can actually drive wells. You can put up multiple buildings for agricultural purposes. But we could not find zoned agricultural property without paying big bucks. Here it is really, really expensive to buy farmland, like super expensive. So we didn't do that. So
we have some folks that bought a campground down in Tennessee, I believe. And what was funny is they was kind of checking broadly in Tennessee about what could be done, what couldn't be done. Well, it turns out the county this campground was in, they couldn't do any of the things they wanted to do. They wanted to change this and build this and do that.
Right.
And yet, like the next county, you could. And they ended up selling, and I think even losing money on it because they couldn't do all the things they wanted to do. Yeah.
So that is, I think, the number one thing people tend to overlook is they fall in love with a place and they just automatically make assumptions that they can do what they want to do.
Emotional purchase. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the thing you want to look into. Can you farm or homestead? Many are limited with the amount of animals or the kind of animals they can have. Are you okay with that? I mean, you might be okay with, I just want some chickens and ducks, and I'm fine with that. Or they might tell you how many. Where we're at currently, we can have 4 chickens. That's it. 4 chickens. We can't have ducks. We can have 4 chickens. No roosters. Where we're moving to, we really aren't limited. I mean, we are in some ways. We would have to have so many animals, though, for it to be limited, which we don't have any plans to have that amount of animals. But the biggest thing is do not go by what the real estate agent tells you, the county clerk tells you. Do not go by anybody's word. You need to get that in print. Because I've actually had people do what your friend did, but they were told they could do it, only to find out later they could not. Yep. Because they went by somebody's word and didn't get it in print.
Real estate agent. Oh, yeah, you could do that here. No problem.
Right. Somebody who financially was going to make money off of that situation. Yeah. So what we did was we found the zoning for our township and our county, and we printed it all 400 pages, which was a lot of ink, but I'm glad to have that. You just cannot trust people at their word. It's not that they would, some people would literally lie to you, but some people just don't know. They just don't know.
Maybe you didn't thinking about this, but it's just coming to my mind. Also, what is the feel? What is the environment of the place where you live? And what I mean by that is politically, kind of emotionally, because even though it says one thing right now, if it's leaning another way, it could change really fast. I know out, especially like the Northwest areas of the country, there's been some stuff go down on small farms where they're making it illegal to do certain things on small farms and sell their food and do things because of safety. It's about safety.
Yeah.
And, and just because it's the way things are leaning in a certain area, it might be okay now, but, and like I said, I don't want to get political necessarily, but I'm just saying some politics in certain areas, you see where that goes in other places. And if it looks like that's maybe the flavor here, you might want to consider that for the future.
Yeah. I kind of talk about that in a little bit because you do want to, you want to ask questions. You want to contact local farm groups. That's one way you could get kind of the feel for the area. Many states have a small farm legal defense. You can contact them and talk to them maybe about what's been going on in the area, that kind of stuff. You're going to want to look into what you might need permits for. Some places, they're not going to care. You're going to need permits for very little things. Other places, if you put a shovel in the ground, they might want you to get a permit.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the more urban you are, the more these rules are probably going to come into play. So, in some agricultural communities, it is no big deal if you want to drive another well so you have more water to water your crops. And other places, that's a big no-no. So just look into that. Legal documents you may need or want or not. Maybe you don't want to. It really depends. Are you going to want to get an LLC? Are you going to want to get organic certification? If you want to get organic certification, you really need to be careful what property you're using, because I think it has to be clear of chemicals for several years before you can get your certification.
Right.
So you're going to want to look into that. Land restrictions, like we'd already talked about with easements. Do you have power lines or gas lines or anything on the property? Walk it. So this is a story that happened to us. We bought our property. We didn't buy it. We had put contingencies on the property. When we went to our purchase, we used a real estate agent. And in the contingencies, one of the contingencies stated that if we could farm the property and have specific animals, if we found out that we couldn't, then that was a way for us to legally back out of the sale. So we put that in our purchase agreement because at the time I was having a hard time getting the paperwork. But one of the things we found when we were walking our property was the whole length of our property, we have power lines. And it was not on the paperwork that there was an easement for the power lines. And so when we talked to the people that we were purchasing from, they said, no, there's no easement. And we're like, there has to be, there's power lines here. And it took us 2 weeks in actually contacting the power company. And we actually had to get a picture of the tag off of one of the power poles to prove the power poles were even there, because they had never been put on a survey.
Oh, wow.
And we wanted to know what was going to happen in the future with those poles and how long they had the easement for, like how many years and what was going to happen in the future. Were they going to be able to just put a big, huge substation there? All of that kind of stuff. So it was never in any of the information on the property we owned. So we kind of had to hunt that down. And that's why, for us at least, that's why we used a realtor. You could probably use a lawyer and put contingencies on the purchase so we could back out if we needed to. So
now I'm just curious, what will be the end result in that? Are they what kind of easement rights do they have?
We have to keep 15 feet on either side of the pole. We can't put anything permanent, which is fine because we would just, most of where it's at is trees. The other portion of where it's at is where we planned on having pasture, which I'm fine. It's
kind of like right on your edge of your property, or
it's kind of on the edge, but not really. So, but we could graze. We can graze animals. We can use it for driveway or whatever. You just couldn't put like a structure, and you probably wouldn't want to put a fence there.
Are they able to drive in and access it whenever they want?
Yep.
So you can't really fence it off or get anything. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But that is also where we found out they're going to be spraying this summer, and I was able to contact them and get designated as an organic farm and not have them spray.
Interesting. Okay, cool. I was curious.
Yeah, but it means we have to maintain that so that if a power pole falls, they can get back to it. So, yeah. So make sure you're not buying, the other thing is make sure you're not buying a dangerous site with dilapidated buildings, mostly contaminated. I was thinking like brownfield, like specifically if you're buying something that maybe was an old farm, is there a buried oil tank somewhere underneath in the ground that's leaking? Is there any way to find that out? Look for stuff like that. Number 7 was land size and layout. I don't know. I kind of feel like this one, I'm getting into the weeds with some of this stuff, but some people are going to want to be growing grains and stuff like that. You're going to need more land for that. You're going to need flatter land for that. So just take all those things into consideration as you start to think about what you want and what you're looking at.
Well, even just consider something like dragging chicken tractors across the land. If it's super hilly and there's not a flat piece anywhere, that's difficult. If you're going to do stuff like that, you got to really think about that.
Right. And so one of the things we thought about this when we were doing it, but what we also noticed was, and we've been able to get to know the neighbors, is can you lease land nearby? Maybe we have a bunch of zoned agriculture right across the street is all zoned ag, but it's not really used. It's just open fields. We could possibly lease that if we ever wanted to. Some of the things you want to consider is if you can buy hay and feed nearby affordably. Shipping hay and feed in gets kind of expensive if you can't grow it yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on what part of the country you're in. Like around here, it's super easy to find local, and get it. But I'm imagining there's a lot of places where, you're going to have to bring it in from some distance. They just don't.
We have so many trees up here that it's really not common for hay fields. I mean, we have some, but not a lot. For me, it wasn't as important because I'm going to be using more civil pasture, tree hay type things. We're not going to be doing a lot of cattle. But just think about those things. Think about what your goals are.
That was Rachel just like low key flexing on everybody. We're going to be doing it the right way. We're not going to be bringing it out.
We're just doing it differently. Mostly because we knew one of the things my husband 100% did not want was flat land. That is almost every farmer's dream, is to have flat land. My husband said, I do not want flat land. I want hills. So
better for deer hunting. Yeah.
It is. And it is pretty, that rolling look. And so you have to adjust what your tastes are for what you can do. So of course, access again plays a role here. Strangely shaped parcels are typically worth less. So you might be able to get a good deal here, but you're going to want to make sure you have rock solid access. Environmental considerations. Oh, I was thinking about this because I don't know if you've had problems with this, but people will buy a piece of property and then find out that there's wetlands and the wetlands are protected and they can't touch the cattails, or make sure when you get into this that you're not getting something like that there's some special species. You don't have a spotted owl or cattails you can't touch.
Those are good places to bury the bodies, though, of trespassers, because they can't never be dug up.
You said it, I didn't. Those are bogs, though, but then that preserves them too long. So there you go.
Yeah, that's true.
And then, for us, we are moving into an area where there's going to be more predation. We've got some bigger things to deal with there. We'll have bears to deal with now and bobcats. So you got to think about that. Are you ready to deal with that? Are you ready to put in the infrastructure like electric fences or big fences, tall fences? Are you willing to be carrying a gun all the time when you're on your property? Because quite honestly, when you live in bear country, that might be probably what you should be doing. So you got to think about that.
I would even say also, when you're considering the size and the layout of your land, especially if it's an odd layout or something, it might be worth it actually paying for a independent survey.
Yes,
on your land, because you have neighbors right up against that, and there might be some disputes on where property lines are, especially if it's got like an odd shape to it or something, and know exactly where your property line is. Because, I've been using that. I've been hunting on that section of that property for 40 years. You ain't gonna tell me I can't hunt there. Well, that's our land, and you get in this big dispute with a neighbor, and it can be a hassle. And so
we have that currently where we're at. Where we're at, the old survey, because it was done by hand, had different lines than when they started using satellites to do surveys. And on our side of where we're at on the lake, all of us are encroaching on each other. So our driveway is partially on our neighbor's piece of property. Our neighbor's garage is partially on our piece of property.
Really? Wow.
Both sides.
Yeah.
But it's just, what do you do?
Yeah.
But those are things. That's why it's important to get a survey. And you can put that, like you can put that when you put your purchase agreement in, contingent upon survey.
Yeah. Because there can be some big disputes on that. I mean, you can definitely literally find somebody hunting on your property because they always have, because there was, they thought that was part of their land because no one lived there for 30 or 40 years or something,
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Well, we actually had, apparently our place was a big place where a lot of the locals went and mushroomed.
Mm-hmm.
So when our piece of property sold, we had people wandering. We had put out some deer cams, and we found people wandering on our property.
Yeah, you'll probably be dealing with that for a couple of years, I wouldn't doubt.
Yeah, and we were nice about it. My husband approached a guy that we found wandering around in the woods. He's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that it had sold. I've always come here and got mushrooms." And the guy was super nice about it. He goes, "Hey, by the way, up there in that corner, that's where the really good morels are."
Nice.
So yeah,
He was just hoping you'd let him go get them.
right, yeah. So so number 8 was security and privacy. This is really going to depend on each person. Some people do not want privacy. We live in a fishbowl where we're at now, which is fine. We like all of our neighbors, but we want more privacy now. So you might want a piece of property that's more treed with less people around, or you might want to move to an urban environment because you want the block parties and that's all going to be something you have to think about, but you still will need to think of security. Is there a meth house down the street? Seriously, that is so common anymore. It's not even funny.
I know, believe me.
Yes, so do we. So do we. Safety, is there wildfires? That's one of the things we never thought about till we had 2 years of drought. And then last year we had fires out by our property. Lots of them because it was so dry. Hurricanes, tornadoes, drug activity, gang activity. Are you prepared to deal with those? So just look into that because you don't know. Is there a problem house on your street? If there is, everybody on that street will tell you, yeah, that house down there. So
that isn't limited to urban areas. That can definitely be out in the country as well.
Yes, it can. In fact, I know that there's a problem house actually on the road that we're on.
Yeah.
It's kind of everywhere now, but if you know it's there, it's different than not knowing it's there.
We was at a friend's house one time. They had a really big place. They had, like 90 something acres, and we were hunting, and we were out in the back, like where they never go. It was like clear in the back section, right? And we're back there, and we found, me and another buddy were hunting on another friend's land. We came up and told him to say, man, there's been people partying back there in that corner. They had like big bonfire area, and and you could find there was like needles and stuff.
Oh gosh.
And everything. And it was on his land. So he's back there cleaning it all up, and he put up some cams. He's looking for them and stuff. Because you could have that even coming on a portion of your land happening,
Right.
Which then you got a lot of liability issues even,
Here on our property, we have a dock because we're on a very small lake. It's more like a large pond. We were having people coming on. We didn't even know who they were, just literally standing on our dock and fishing off of it, which becomes a liability to us. So we had to put no trespassing signs on our dock.
Crazy, isn't it?
Crazy. But, people do things. So then, and, another thing to consider is future expansion if you're going to want to be doing that. Or can you possibly work, like before Curtis Stone moved to the country, he did a lot of spin farming. I think it was him, wasn't it? That farmed people's yards. That might be a possibility if you do urban. It's even a possibility if you are really rural, like Joel Salatin, which I've been to his farm. It takes a while to get way back in there. A lot of his land he leases. So, there's always possibilities for that. And then, of course, number 10 is personal preference and community social events. This is totally going to fit whatever it is you want. Like, is this area something that will fit you? Like you were talking about with political leanings or things going on. It's something you're going to want to consider. Do you want a slow town to live in where nothing is going on and people ride their dirt bike to the grocery store? Seriously, that's what happens where we're moving to.
Four-wheelers and snowmobiles in the winter. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you care if the local range is noisy? Do you want to hear gunshots? Because some people don't want to hear gunshots. Other people, it does not bother them at all. We're actually on a trail, so we hear dirt bikes go by all the time. Are you okay with that? Are you okay with every Saturday morning at 6:00 hearing the dirt bikes go by your property? Those are kind of things to consider. You want to be part of hunting and fishing, cold versus a warm climate, wet versus a dry, rugged and rural, or an urban homestead. Are you going to want to be part of a community of other growers or homesteaders? You might want to look for that where you go. I know right now it's huge. Tons of people are moving to Tennessee. If you want to be in probably one of the biggest homestead areas in the country, that's probably somewhere you would want to consider living.
Yeah. And if enough people move into an area, you literally can change the climate and change the attitudes
Yeah.
of the, because I mean, the majority kind of makes that change, so if you get a lot of people moving into an area, it can actually be a really good thing if you're all the same mindset, because it affects the local politics and everything. And, but if you're that outlier who just thinks differently than all the people around you, there's probably going to be some head clashing going on.
And if you're okay with that, or if you're a loner and don't want any of that, that might be okay for you. But you also might get really lonely and depressed if you do want to seek out other people. And so that's one of the other things I put on here was like, if you were going to homeschool or private school or 4-H, or you want your kids involved in something, you do kind of have to consider that if you have kids at home still, what are they going to have to do? Are they going to want to be participating in swimming or horseback riding or 4-H or whatever? Are you going to be able to do that where you're at? Does the school offer it? Or as a homeschooler, are you going to have a support group for that?
Yeah, you have to take an hour drive into the city every day to make that happen, and hang out while they do that, and then have to bring them out, go back, and that's that kind of gets tiring after a while.
Right. Yeah. And one of the other things I wanted to, I don't know, this might tick a few people off, but one of the most annoying things we've had with living where we're at, our area has grown exponentially in a very short period of time. Is people coming in here from the big city and wanting to change what used to be rural town. There is no quicker way to tick off the locals than to move rural and want all of the things that you left the big city. So if you want to remain friends with the people you move in, I'm like, because that's what's happened here is everybody loved where we live because it's quaint and sweet. And now we're kind of like a big city with major growing pains, and all the locals kind of hate it.
There was a guy I talked to a few years ago, and he's a farmer, been farming pigs for a long time. Had some folks from the city buy the property right next to their property, move in, and then started complaining about the smell, like to the city boards and the county officials.
That's exactly what I'm talking
all
about.
All kinds of trouble.
Yes.
I mean, they didn't have to make a change. It's like, you moved in here and then tried to change the situation, but you don't like the
That's
smell
exactly
of the country.
What I'm talking about.
Next to a pig farm. Yeah.
You're asking for a lot of resentment. It does happen a lot, but you're asking for a lot of resentment.
But on the other side of that, people will move into a neighborhood or like an HOA, and then they want to change the rules. And it's like, well, don't move into those places if you don't want to follow
it goes both ways. It sure does.
Go both ways.
Yeah. So that's why I was like, I think it's probably going to be more of an issue if you move rural or if you move to an urban setting, but there are people that move rural, and I don't quite understand why they move rural if they don't want to see pigs and hear guns, but just so basically the bottom line is get a good lawyer or good realtor that can help you walk through this stuff. There are people like Curtis Stone that is doing some classes on this, or he's got a ton of YouTube videos. It's hard to not be in a hurry, but don't get emotionally attached to a piece of property until you start to really look at it and have your list of things you want. It is crazy. I had this super long list of all the things that I wanted from our property. And I said, I know I'm never going to get them all. Guess what? I think we got all but like 2 of them.
But it might be good to go down that list and prioritize and go, okay, what are the things that I say I cannot, that these are must-haves? What are some things that I'm willing to compromise on? I mean, you just kind of organize your list on a high priority to lower priority.
And it's all going to be so individual because everybody has their own goals and desires. It's really hard to do like a list like this because of that. But make a list and then just really start looking around. But I think my biggest thing, especially in the current climate, and after watching so many issues go on with the right to farm in Michigan and a few other states, is make sure that you have like I said, the zoning, make sure you understand. And if you don't understand, make sure you find people that understand and get that stuff in writing and actually see it in writing before you buy a piece of property. Because there is nothing worse than buying a piece of property and wanting to use it for a campground and then finding out you have to sell it.
You could literally find the property that looks and is kind of perfect for what you want to do. And it's just in an area that's just going to make it impossible for you. And that would be so depressing to have that perfect piece of property. And yet the rules and regulations of that area would just prevent you from doing all the things you want to do. So yeah, I think that's really good stuff. I mean, you could probably go on and on and on with something like this, just have a list after list. And there's so many other things to probably consider, but I think this is a really good starting point and a place where you could, take something like this and say this, I'm going to consider these things, and it get you really, really close to the place you want to have.
Yeah. So, and there's so many tools out there at our fingertips that didn't used to be there with online tools. Use them and just spend some time if you're property shopping or house shopping. Even I didn't even go about this if you were looking for a place with a house, but you're going to want to
there's going to be that thing where, having bare land like what you guys had versus having a place that's already established to some degree. I mean, in a lot of ways that might be cheaper, but you might have to make some sacrifices on what you really want. There's a lot of things to consider there as well. For sure.
Yeah. The reason we went with rural land was, we wanted to buy property and we kind of didn't want to wait, and we didn't have the money to buy a piece of a house. Our house wasn't ready to sell. So in order to buy a house, we had to be able to sell our house. So we went with that. And number two, the reason we did it was because I didn't want to deal with somebody else's problem.
Right. Yeah. There's always hidden things that you're going to find later.
Man, we have remodeled houses and we have built houses, and I'm telling you, it's always a can of worms. And that was also the other reason we didn't want to buy a working farm, is I didn't want to buy somebody else's problems, whether or not they dump stuff, whether or not they used glyphosate. I didn't want to deal with it. So we went with probably the harder route, which is clearing woods and turning it into a farm. But we're not doing a traditional farm. We're doing permaculture, which it probably does work a lot easier with.
Yeah.
It's still going to be a ton of work. It's still going to be
no doubt. But
and it already has been. I mean, we have cleared so many logs already. I mean, it's taken us 4 years. So yeah.
And something else you didn't even get to, when you consider things you want, like growing or whatever, maybe you want to do agritourism and you want people, you want to set up something like that. And you want to have a setup like that where people can come in and have parking areas and, things like that. I mean, there's so many things when you really lay out what you want to do. That's the most important thing, knowing what you want to have.
Well, and that is something to consider too, because a lot of townships are limiting people's ability to do Airbnb or hip camp or camping. So look into that. It's that something you're looking at, and how easy is it to insure your property if you wanted to open it up, say for weddings, just stuff like that. Start thinking about that, because those are all things that are really nice income streams that a lot of farms are doing now.
Yep.
But not all properties are going to be conducive to that. Not all townships, because you got to look at township, county, and state. You're going to want to make sure all of that is something that you can do.
Yeah. And it might be something that, it might be technically legally for you to do it, but you got a bunch of neighbors that are going to fight you on it once it starts happening.
Yeah.
You might want to talk to them before ever even doing that too. See if it's something that, well, that's neat, whatever. Or say, boy, we'd hate to have that around here. That right there's a red flag, because if I'm telling you, a couple neighbors could change some things real quick.
Yeah. And you want to have a good relationship with your neighbors if you can. You really do. Absolutely. It's ideal. Anyways, it can make your life pretty miserable if you don't. Ask me how I know.
Absolutely. I've dealt with it too. So anything else to add before we close this up? We've been at it for quite a while.
We have been. I think that's it. Unless you had more to add, I'm sure you could go so deep into this.
You could take every one of these categories and dive even deeper, and we could be on here for 3 hours talking about it. But, I think it's a good place to start and get things to consider. And, I don't know that I'll ever be looking at a whole homestead. It might just fall in my lap, but I've even considered just buying a piece of land and living where I live, but having something 5 miles away to where I drive and do my little permaculture projects, on 5 acres or something, 5 miles from here. And you can find stuff like that too. It might be another way, even if it's a place where you're not going to live, and just have the property to do things on it.
Is it Cog Hill Farm did that for a long time? There's a few people that do that. I mean, it's totally doable. People do it. We have technology that makes that so possible now.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's just things there's so many ways to go about it. But again, we said it when we began. I want to say it again now. Homestead where you're at, folks. You don't have to do all this and start there. You start where you're at. And if things go right and things are, going in a way that you like where they're going, and you decide you're ready to take that next step and look for a piece of land, that's the next step.
Yeah.
But don't let that prevent you from doing it right where you're at.
Well, and this could even be a city lot. I have seen where my mom lives, which is an hour and a half away. You can buy a city lot for so cheap. I'm talking a couple $1,000s.
We bought the lot next to us.
Yeah. See, you could do that
with a barn on it for $5,000.
Right. Yeah. And so you could do that. You could just be buying a piece of property down the street and you're living in an apartment because you want to garden more. Or, this does not have to be acreage like what we're doing. And it doesn't have to be rural. This could be, you could tone this down to urban, buying it with a couple of friends to make a garden. This could be hundreds of acres. This could be a 1/10 of an acre.
Yeah. Yeah, we sharing books last week.
Yes.
I shared the book Paradise Lot, and these were two guys that want to start permaculture, start farming on a small scale, and they bought a city lot. I mean, they bought a house, a duplex, and a lot in a town, and started doing their things. And they found out real quick there were some things they weren't allowed to be doing that they were doing, got neighbor problems and things like that. But they still overcame and was still able to do a lot. And so,
that is an excellent book. I mean,
if that's where you're at in life, and that's all you can do it. Because that's a good first step, and it's amazing how far that can take you.
And some people, that is absolutely the life that they want. They want to be in the city where all the culture is, where all the farmers market are, where all the people are, where all the things to do are, and they want to have a small farm. You can do that. There's so many examples of that. So this podcast isn't just about, what we did, which was expand from 1/3 of an acre to expanding to 20. This is grow where you're planted. This is everybody.
Yeah. So I guess we could probably mention even Ben Falk's book, the Resilient Farm and Homestead, if you're doing a little bit larger acreage. I mean, so you got two examples right there. Paradise Lot and Ben Falk's book, Resilient Farm and Homestead.
Yeah.
Both of them can really help you develop and think about what you're looking for in a piece of land and what the possibilities are for that piece of land.
Yeah, and I think of like the podcast that we've had with Dakota Cohen and Nick Ferguson, and doing things a little bit differently. If you cannot find, because I don't know, in Michigan at least, farmland is expensive. Flat farmland is thousands and thousands of dollars an acre. It's not affordable. If you need to go a little bit, for us, it was cheaper to buy a hilly property. Yeah, if you wanted to go a little bit different than the typical farm and wanted to do permaculture, those on a little bit larger scale. Those are great podcasts to listen to. But obviously, we all know the most famous person that I'm talking to, Harold, that started on 1/10 of an acre and grows amazing food in a city. So, yeah.
You can do it anywhere.
We're listening to the pro that can do it anywhere.
Yeah. I was inspired by a lot of people doing it before me, and I just kind of imitated them. But I mean, it's amazing what you can do on a very small piece of land.
Yeah, we have a couple hundred podcasts of you talking about doing it in the city.
I wouldn't want to go the next step and have a lot more land, but it's amazing what you can do on a small area. So I guess with that, we'll end it and just tell folks, until next time, happy homesteading. God bless.
And grow where you're planted.